All right, hi again. I'm going to try another video, and I'm going to do this as a follow-up to my podcast that I did on why libertarians should not like Donald Trump. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about well, there was some libertarians made the case that what I left out of why libertarians might like Donald Trump is, of course, the Supreme Court and also other court nominations that Trump could make, that sort of Republicans and even Trump will make better nominations to the Supreme Court and to appeals level judges. And that's a great reason to choose to vote for Trump, and why some libertarians might still be voting for Trump despite everything else. So I want to cover that in some depth. First, I will quickly talk about why libertarians might like Biden. So I do believe that he's someone who will listen. Some people are worried that he'll listen too much to progressives, but I think he's got plenty of the mainstream sort of corporate Democrats talking to him, pushing him, and libertarians as well can jump in, and he will listen. So what you have to do is find common ground. So I think there is some definite common ground. Decriminalization, reduction of the militarization of police, which is obviously a big thing right now, and police reform and prison reform is something that there's a lot of pressure from, average regular people on, and protesters. And so I think libertarians could jump in and help push for the particular kinds of decriminalization and police reform and prison reform that they would like to see. So I think that's a great place of common ground. Also, free trade. Certainly, I think Biden's more likely to end the tariffs and open up free trade than, for example, Trump. There's a great article on Cato right now, Democrats and Trade 2021, a pro-trade policy for the Democratic Party. So how about reading that and finding that common ground with Biden? There's also social stuff. We can get rid of all of the Pence conservative, super conservative Christian violations on freedom of the individual. I think libertarians would tend to agree that Biden should be better on that without being an extremist or anything. He'll sort of bring that back to normal. Another place where you can at least bring it back to normal is immigration. Return to normalcy, increase legal immigration, have a path to citizenship, stuff like that. That's a great place of common ground. And then there's ending loopholes. So he may not be great on taxes in every way, but certainly there's a lot of popular pressure as well on ending loopholes for big corporations. And some of these loopholes basically end up being subsidies through the tax code. And there are subsidies and even monopoly status that are offered to only the biggest corporations. And this is actually something libertarians should care a lot about, not only because it's unfair and it's providing subsidies and providing monopoly through government, which is the only way monopoly can really exist, right? But it can certainly exist if you have political help. And Citizens United to help to allow that political help, because it gave corporations a lot of power with the government. And Biden's a moderate. He's not going to go crazy on this, but you could push him to help reduce those loopholes, reduce those subsidies and monopoly help, and make things more fair for the economy, for small business, for competition. And we have to be aware that the kind of corporatism that we have right now is getting so bad. There's so much corporate power right now, this tie between corporations and government, that we're actually moving towards a kind of a corporatism that is basically oligarchy. And that is one of the biggest threats, if not the biggest threat, to the democratic free market system that we currently supposedly still have. But Trump has increased this, has pushed this, has created more oligarchy in America than ever before. And so this is something that we really need to turn back on and change right now. And Biden is actually someone who could perhaps help doing that without turning it into socialism or, making it worse in any way, if we put the right pressure on, right? Because the corporate Democrats, are fine with how things are going probably, but the progressives and the libertarians can band together and can push Biden to turn back on this. Okay, so now to justices. So the way I'm going to address this is I'm going to talk about justices that libertarians tend to like, the ones that people consider conservative on the court, but who are originalists supposedly. Some of them are more textualists, some of them more originalists, but essentially they're the people that libertarians say are protecting the Constitution. And I understand the importance of this. I think this is a really essential thing, but I would argue that you have some good decisions from the supposed originalists and some good decisions from the supposed evolving Constitution people, and that they both protect the Constitution when it's convenient for them. But this idea of liberals and progressives on the court is probably more true than this divide based on who's originalist and who's not, although maybe they do line up pretty well with each other. But in any case, I think there is some ways in which we do have an evolving constitution. For example, at the beginning, we only had a constitution that protected property owning white men, right? And we had to evolve the constitution, which was also textualist to what the constitution said: all men are created equal. Of course, we have to interpret men as humans, right? And, you know, in order to allow women to have the right. But in any case, it is sort of an evolving thing in order to make sure that everyone has rights. So I think there's truth to both the originalism and the evolving interpretation of the Constitution. So now let's look at some of the decisions by some of the supposed originalists that libertarians tend to say make good decisions. So we'll look at Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. Okay, so on the First Amendment, Trump said he wanted to expand libel laws, all right? And in February 2019, Clarence Thomas seemed to echo Trump's sentiment, publicly urging the court to reconsider a landmark 1964 ruling that made it harder for public figures to sue the media for defamation. And so this is something that Trump wanted to change, and Clarence Thomas was going along with him on it. And basically what that would mean is that public figures, politicians, right, and government officials would be able to sue media in a broader way, right, than since 1964. Basically so that they could go back to a time when they would have been able to say, media, I don't like what you're saying, you're making me look bad, therefore I'm going to sue you, which would basically silence media. It would silence the media from being able to actually criticize government officials and stuff. And that could be very, very dangerous. And it certainly seems a violation of the First Amendment, in my opinion, right? This was an important decision, and it happened before all of modern media. So you can imagine how much worse it would be if we rolled this back now that we have the kind of modern media that we have today. Okay, so he didn't seem to care about the First Amendment then. But when does he care about the First Amendment? When he can use it to allow Citizens United, which basically says corporations need to have free speech to such an extent that they can put all the money that they want into politics. And this is one of the turning points, not the only one by any stretch, but one of the turning points which allowed corporate power to be in politics to such an extent that we're moving towards this oligarchy and this kind of, you know, being able to buy politicians to protect your monopoly, to make you the only player in town, and to get subsidies and everything else. So again, he's using the First Amendment in a crazy way when he wants to, and then he's completely destroying the First Amendment in another way when he doesn't like. And in both cases, he's protecting politicians. So to me, that seems suspect. Okay. Now, in another place, he was seemed to contradict himself, and it was a little bit suspect that he's actually protecting the Constitution, and that's on decentralization and like state and local rights. So Kennedy wrote the majority opinion striking down a Texas sodomy law on a right to privacy basis. However, who dissented? Thomas dissented along with Scalia and Rehnquist. Okay, so they basically said that no, Texas should be able to be tyrannical against its own citizens because, you know, states' rights. So when convenient, localities should have power, but it's not protected all the time. Because in cases of abortion, gay rights, and things like that, when the localities want to actually expand rights for their people, they strike it down when the states and localities want to make changes that are helpful for their people, such as the Section 4 of the voting rights. Okay, the jurisdictions with a history of suppressing the minority vote from changing their voting procedures. They wanted to change their voting procedures to make it more possible for people to vote. Clarence Thomas was against this. He said that Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act was unconstitutional because they shouldn't be able to change their voting procedures without approval from the Department of Justice. So again, he's saying that the government is right, that the Department of Justice should have the power, not the localities in this case. So it does seem like he keeps protecting government in each of these cases, rather than protecting the Constitution. All right. And we'll get back to the Department of Justice, because this is a place where Trump has really messed things up and really been unconstitutional himself and really turned things more towards this oligarchy that I was talking about before. So libertarians should believe in equality of opportunity and equality before the law. I don't think Clarence Thomas and the other justices that libertarians like actually do care about equality of opportunity and equality before the law. So Clarence Thomas didn't care about misconduct by a prosecutor and wanted a death row case to go forward. The person was put on death row because the prosecutor had purposefully hidden exonerating evidence from the lawyer, and Clarence Thomas wanted that the death row case to go forward anyways. He also went after Gideon versus Gainwright, a 1963 decision requiring the government to provide lawyers for indigent defendants, arguing that the Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to counsel, but only if you have the money to hire one. Justice Alito, well, there's Copper versus Amnesty International, human rights activists, he argued, cannot challenge a law that helps the government to intercept international communication because they can't show that they were injured. Okay, so this is, I thought libertarians actually don't want the government to be able to intercept things, that human rights activists should be able to challenge it, but no, apparently not. There was the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment apparently does not prohibit states from using sedative in lethal injection, even though it was linked to botched executions. I think that's Clarence Thomas again. I'm not sure if Alito went along with it. And the Constitutional Accountability Center said that Justice Alito, basically by tracking how often Supreme Court decisions side with the United States Chamber of Commerce, which is a good proxy for whether the justices are siding with big business or not. Year after year, Alito is the corporation's best friend, not the libertarian decision or the constitutional decision. In recent weeks, the court has blocked some of Trump's worst ideas, his efforts to terminate DACA, there was an opinion in favor of LGBTQ rights, and striking down a Louisiana law limiting access to abortions. Those were good decisions. Samuel Alito dissented in all three cases. And I think libertarians, again, would find that disturbing if they pay attention to it. So I don't think that you can just say that these justices do everything originalist or that they are libertarian in their decision making. There are a lot of examples where they're not. And in most of these cases, the so-called liberals on the court or the evolving Constitution people all went on the other side. Pretty much. So I think you have to realize that there's a balance. That's basically my argument there. Not saying all of their decisions are, Kelo versus New London. I think it's flipped. It was definitely more libertarian from those guys. But it's, I think you have to realize that there's some of each. So it should not be a deciding factor. That's my argument. Okay, now to the DOJ. So Trump's handpicked people on the that he chooses within the Department of Justice, like Bill Barr, and the people he chooses as prosecutors, or that Bill Barr chooses as prosecutors, right? They are basically not upholding the rule of law, okay, at all. So Trump tends to take hand-picked donors with no experience, and he uses them to basically thwart investigations into Trump and his allies, and create new investigations that tend to lead to nothing, tend to find nothing, but take up a lot of time and are used to make hay and to basically pretend that there's something going on dodgy on the other side, right? Whether it's about Biden or whether it's about how the Russia hoax, the Russia investigation is a hoax. They've done several investigations into the Trump-Russia probe, and they all found, that really there was something to look into, and it was not a hoax. It was not political. He is probably going to try to come out with an October surprise about this new investigation with his handpicked person doing it, but it's not going to find anything. But Bill Barr likes to spin things, like he spinned the Mueller report as saying there was nothing there. He's going to try to spin this new thing as saying that there was some problem with the investigation in the beginning and it was only done for political reasons, but that's not true. He's trying to distract you into believing that's happening on the other side when in fact it's him, it's Trump, who keeps doing political things with the Department of Justice. Okay, so Bill Barr tried to pretend that Jeff Berman, the U.S. attorney in New York, had resigned, right? He lied about it. He said Jeff Berman resigned. Jeff Berman said, I didn't resign, and I'm not resigning. And so Barr said, okay, then you're fired. Okay, and he was replaced. So he It happened at the time when Steve Bannon was being investigated, and that's basically why he did this, why he fired Jeff Berman. Okay, and he tried to install Donald Trump's golfing buddy Jay Clayton, who had never prosecuted a day in his life before, as the new U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. Well, Jeff Berman kind of outmaneuvered him and made sure that the handpicked person did not take that place, and instead that his own deputy attorney general took over. Deputy Act and Audrey Strauss became the acting U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. Audrey Strauss, and that was his deputy. Okay, and that is how it's supposed to happen, right? So Bannon is now facing charges for his criminal activity, pocketing money from the Let's Build a Wall crowdfunding charity, and that's only because the hand-picked person didn't get the job. Right? It was only because Jeff Berman stood up for himself and made sure that this Jay Clayton guy never made it in, and that Audrey Strauss took the job. And that's the only reason why Steve Bannon is actually being investigated for this really dodgy thing with the charity. And we'll see how it all turns out. But this has happened several times before, right? So Trump and Barr have fired or tricked into resigning several top attorneys from both the SDNY, Southern District, and also the DC office. So recently we learned that the Republican-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee made criminal referrals, right, to the DC U.S. Attorney's Office for Don Jr., Jared Kushner, and Steve Bannon, and two others. Okay, Bill Barr swooped in, pulled out the top prosecutor out of the DC U.S. Attorney Office, Jessie Liu, pulled her out, pretending to give her a job at the Treasury, which he then revoked and reneged on that, right? And once she was out, they put their own handpicked person in, okay? So even though a Republican-controlled committee had made these referrals, right? It was at that time that they pulled out the top prosecutor, inserted their own guy named Tim Shea, right? This is a Trump lackey named Tim Shea. And so what happened? Have we seen anything happen with the case of the Trump family members? No. Instead, what we saw was that Tim Shea immediately went in and dumbed down Roger Stone's sentencing, right? And which prompted all the prosecutors on the case to walk out, right? Because it was so wrong. And he tried to kill the Mike Flynn case, even though he had made a guilty plea. And there's been no action on those referrals by the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Republican-controlled committee. So those were real investigations, which are not happening because Trump's lackeys get put in place. And this is not, equality before the law. This is not what libertarians should want. This is not justice. This is basically oligarchy and authoritarianism. And so I've made my case, and please comment. Tell me what you think. All right? Catch you later.